What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Beal of Empowerment Unlimited .net, and this week, we are talking about living compassionately. Now, before I get into that, I want to set the astrological framework. I picked this topic at the beginning of the year because March and April have us very much in heavy Piscean energy. Pisces is the vast interconnectedness of all life. It is ruled by Neptune, which transcends earthly experience from everything from madness and drug abuse to delusion to incredible inspiration to being connected to God's source in everything that we do. And the other big planet that used to rule Pisces, or in the traditional way rules Pisces, Jupiter, the guy that ups the ante of any action that he's involved with, is moving into a conjunction with Neptune, which will be exact next month, but basically coloring all our experience this month, next month, and into May, making us innately, constantly, effortlessly connected to other people on the planet, feeling the pain and the experiences of others, boundaries blurring like crazy. There could be some astonishing artistry that comes out of this. The last time Jupiter and Neptune met in Pisces was in 1856, when an Oxford Don named Charles Dodson decided to adopt the pen name Lewis Carroll and created a fantasy world with a female protagonist that continues to mold our society. Later in the year, L. Frank Baum was also born, and he wrote, a series of books set in Oz, a fantasy story with a female protagonist that has molded our society. So major magic is in the air, in addition to all of the pain and the sorrow and the grief that so many of us are experiencing right now, which leads to living compassionately. And I am honored beyond measure to have with us today Ramananda John E. Welshens. He is a contemporary spiritual teacher who lectures and leads meditation courses throughout North America. He has been a practitioner of mindfulness meditation and various forms of yoga for more than 50 years. In addition to his latest book, One Soul, One Love, One Heart, The Sacred Path to Healing All Relationships, he's also the author of Awakening from Grief, Finding the Way Back to Joy When Prayers Aren't Answered, two books that emerged from 45 years of experience helping people deal with dramatic life change and loss. I'm so happy that you're with us today. Welcome, Ramananda.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. What a delight to be with you.
Yes, and I will let everyone know we can recognize each other in a crowd. We have met face to face, and I've taken John's meditation classes and worked with him in other ways. I think you're uniquely positioned to speak about where we are at this troubling moment in time. I have seen you over the past number of years actually publicly comment on the challenges that we have faced, not just being your approach to being a spiritual teacher, from my observation, is not living off somewhere that is unconnected from the experiences that everyone's going through, but increasingly very open about the impact of them. So I see you as a spiritual teacher who also very much lives in the world. Would you say that's an accurate perception?
I hope so. It's really been, I think when I first got interested in spiritual teachings back in the late 1960s, I probably was inclined toward thinking that I wanted to go off to some mountain in the Himalayas and just sit in a cave for the rest of my life. And I came to realize that was not the path that I wanted to pursue, that it was really much more, as you said, Kathy, being in the world and cultivating spiritual awareness here in the middle of all the craziness that happens on planet Earth. Because it seems to me that this is where we're really tested, where our inner wisdom, whatever we have cultivated, is tested, and where we can deepen it. Everything that happens here offers us opportunities to go deeper. And it's really the same approach that I later learned Thich Nhat Hanh, who just died, the great Zen master from Vietnam, his approach, which he called engaged Buddhism, which was honed in his experience in Vietnam during the Vietnamese War, and being a young monk and having to decide, do I stay in the monastery or do I go out in the world and try to alleviate suffering? And his decision was to do both. So, yeah, I think it's really, it's a fascinating time. I'm not making light of it. It's a very difficult time for most people on Earth right now. I think we just have to acknowledge that and open to the possibility that it is right in the middle of all these difficulties and challenges that we can gain some really deep spiritual insight.
So our reaction to things that happen out in the world can be very telling. I mean, there seems to me that there's a spectrum of emotional reactions people can have. Anger, helplessness, blame, judgment, and I don't want to say capitulation and giving up, but how about compassion? Would that be a possible slightly higher reaction? Well, maybe it's inappropriate to use a qualifier like higher.
Well, you could use worse qualifiers. I think it's higher in the sense, I think of higher as what is going to lead us to happiness. That to me is the higher teaching or the higher path. And compassion is one of the things that will lead us to happiness. It's unfortunately rarely seen that way in this culture, and in fact is sometimes disparaged as something weak and, a little bit wishy-washy. Who needs compassion? We need toughness, is what a lot of people think. But I think that that's very misguided. What you shared about the astrological configuration of things right now, emphasizing the interconnectedness of everyone. When the Dalai Lama is asked, every time I've ever heard him asked, at any rate, what he feels the most important single teaching in Buddhism is, he says, the basic interconnectedness of everything. And that's really at the root of astrology. The interconnectedness of the universe, the fact that the planets and the stars all exert influence on what's happening here on Earth and everywhere else in the universe. It's fascinating. The interconnectedness of everything. You know, we're seeing in these devastating videos of what's going on in Ukraine right now. You know, we're realizing this isn't some people in some distant land who don't matter. This is us. This is our neighbors and friends and families and relatives, and you know, and that's a really important thing to recognize. And it's a very hard way to get that teaching, but to realize that our hearts break when we look at what's happening, and when we're aware of what's happening, we hear about what's happening, our hearts break. And you know, from my work with grief, I've always suggested that when our hearts are broken, they're also wide open. So my guidance would be to allow this breaking of our hearts to happen, and allow it to not close our hearts, but wind up with them being much more open than they've ever been, so that we feel our connectedness, not just with the people in the Ukraine, but how about the people in Russia who don't want this, don't want to be a part of this, don't even realize it's happening in their name. Not really in their name, but, you know, so compassion is really the root of all happiness, as it turns out.
And how would you define compassion?
Well, compassion, to me, the simple way to define it is to say that, to basically draw the contrast between compassion and pity, because the two things are confused sometimes. And when we pity someone or some group of people, it's that part of us that says, isn't it terrible what's happening to that person or that group or that country? That's just awful. I'm so sorry it's happening, but there's a little voice inside subtly saying, thank God it's not happening to me or to someone I love. Compassion, that's pity. Compassion is where we do start to realize it is happening to me, because we're all interconnected. It's rooted in recognizing that oneness or interconnection with everyone on earth, and that nothing happens on earth in isolation from other things. So then we're faced with the reality that whatever suffering is present on earth, we're all being affected by. You know, at the same time, whatever joy there is on earth, we're all being affected by. So it's the combination of the two. That's what life on earth is kind of about. But compassion is feeling the suffering of others and feeling the joy of others. Just being tuned in to what's happening in your immediate family, in your immediate environment, and then it just keeps radiating out till it ultimately takes in everyone on earth.
It feels as if we're in a crash course in that right now.
Yeah. I think that's very astute. Yes. That's what it feels like. And
yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the danger is that that when we reach the point where our hearts begin to hurt, what we generally do is react with anger. Or we turn away and we say, you know, it's too horrible. I can't watch it. I can't think about it. But there's no way not to think about it. You know what's going on. You can't pretend it isn't happening. You can try, but that has other repercussions. So in the crash course, developing compassion is, and you know, we don't do it overnight, but it is a crash course, so we're going to have to do it at an accelerated rate. And that is to learn how to be with suffering, how to observe suffering, how to feel empathy for our fellow human beings who are suffering without burning out. That's the problem. And pity causes burnout a lot more than compassion does. Once we realize we're all in this together, your heart may hurt, but let the pain open it rather than closing it.
One thing I have marveled at in the last week is how many people have direct familial connections to Ukraine that I know and that I know of. And there's been something about this particular conflict, this particular situation that has made it automatic for people to stand up and say, whoa, that could be me. Mm-hmm. My family came from here. I know people from there. And I know Russians who have relatives in Ukraine who are struggling. So there's that has already blurred the boundary in this altercation. It's not like it's one of those centuries old Hatfield and McCoy type fights that's going on.
Right. That it's very interesting. I was in Ukraine in 1991 when there was a very hair-raising experience, which was a coup, which in Ukraine and Russia they called a putsch, P-U-T-S-C-H. Putsch was Mikhail Gorbachev was president of the Soviet Union. The Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union at that time.
And now I'm going to have to put the pause button on and ask, and we'll hear the rest of the story after the break. I'm so sorry, but everyone hang on. Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. Today we are discussing living compassionately with Ramananda John E. Welshens. And just before the break, you were talking about having been in Ukraine during the putsch in 1991.
Yes. And it was a hair-raising experience, Kathy. It was really interesting. I had gone on the trip with a bit of trepidation because I was concerned about that there did seem to be some political instability in the Soviet Union. And but what we learned, and we had to get out of the country quickly. It turned out that the putsch only lasted, I think, less than 72 hours. And then Boris Yeltsin was installed. And shortly thereafter, the Soviet Union came apart. And what we had learned was that the Ukrainian people were just really yearning for independence. And, as you said before the break, it wasn't like the Hatfields and the McCoys, the relationship between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Because what's very interesting over there, what was at that time, was that there weren't those kind of divisions. It was really, neither of them was happy with the Soviet government. So that was where their displeasure was focused. And, it was an interesting thing to be in a country like that, a totalitarian nation, and to see what it did to, I guess, dampen the spirit of the human beings who lived there. But their issue was they wanted their country back. They wanted it to be able to be independent. And so they've had that for 30 years. And it was the thing they most longed for when we were there in 91. And they've had it for 30 years, and obviously they're not going to give it up easily. So, but it is an interesting thing in terms of the conflict. I heard one Ukrainian man being interviewed on television earlier today, and he said, no, it isn't that we hate the Russians. We're not angry at the Russians. We love our country. We're defending our country. You know, it isn't, and when this is over, and he said, and we will win. We'll win our country back, and we'll win our independence back, and we're not going to hate the Russians after that. You know, we have family members in Russia. You know, a lot of relatives, as you said. So, yeah, it's a fascinating thing. It's hard to call it a conflict because it isn't like it emerged from some background of animosity or even grievance. The grievance is on the part of the Russian government wanting to reconstitute the Soviet Union.
That does seem to be what's going on here. Now, in that regard, I have certainly come across a lot of people with very specific. Well, I know a lot of people who are actually consciously engaging in activities to my thinking, this is not what you do, curse the person who's behind all of this. And my personal viewpoint is appealing to their spark of humanity, appealing to their spark of divinity, sending them healing as well as everyone else in the whole conflict. I personally don't want to be involved in fueling anybody else's anger or ill intent by sending it back in their face, which I think is a kind of side piece of living compassionately. It's like not even wishing ill for people who are doing things you consider crimes.
Right. Well, it isn't wishing them ill. My sense of living compassionately is to recognize that the compassion has to go toward everyone. And
yes.
So the compassion has to be forgiving of people who commit crimes, as you said, but protecting the people who are being victimized by the crimes. And, you know, I have heard stories of the Dalai Lama who seldom says anything critical of anyone or certainly never anything unkind, but he is not tolerant of people who use a political or spiritual position to take advantage of other people or to lie to other people or steal from other people. That, you know, he says that's got to stop. If you have an opportunity to stop it, do whatever you can to stop it, because that's part of compassion. But when you do it, don't hate the perpetrator, because that just makes things worse. You know, that's a theme that runs through Eastern philosophy. That's very present in the Bhagavad Gita, which was a Hindu book that was very dear to Mahatma Gandhi. He based his teachings on the Bhagavad Gita. And one of the greatest teachings in that book is that if, you know, using the term karma, which is very prevalent in the East, that if you allow people who are deceitful and greedy and selfish and violent to victimize other human beings, you're creating more bad karma on Earth, in essence. In other words, loving them, forgiving them, seeing the divine light in them is one thing. But seeing also that they're doing things to others that are not compassionate or kind calls on us to do whatever we can to stop it. But sometimes in situations like this, what we can do is limited, and it may be limited to just, as you're suggesting so beautifully, Kathy, send love, live in your own divine nature. Don't be a part of the problem. Show how we live in compassion, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. Ram Dass used to say, love the soul, but not the role.
Oh,
Meaning
I like
you, isn't that good? You love that which, the spark of divine that's in everyone, without which that being wouldn't be alive. But you don't have to love the role that they're playing, which could be like sort of a not so nice person. And tolerating that is not what compassion is about. So compassion is very strong. It stands up for people who are being victimized.
it. Enforces values and integrity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
seeing this. We're seeing displays of this in really astonishing ways in the news.
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw last night on the news a man who is the mayor of one of the cities in Poland that is openly just threw its arms open and said, whoever needs to leave Ukraine can come here. And he was asked, well, how many refugees have come? And I think he said 70,000. They said, well, what's the population of your city? He said 40,000. So he said, we're getting close to tripling the population of our city. And he seemed happy about it.
And I've seen photos in a Polish train station of abandoned baby carriages for people coming across the border who've brought their kids.
Yeah.
People,
right.
That sort of thing is all amazing. So I'd like to bring this a little closer to home into something that is more personal for anyone who's listening to this anywhere on the planet. How does a simple individual going about their own complicated life weave this into how they live?
Well, I think it starts with whatever it is you're doing and wherever you are right now. It's interesting. Just before I got on the call with you, Kathy, I was talking to a woman who called me to tell me that after a program I did yesterday down in Bucks County, she had gone to the grocery store and had a fender bender with another person, and the woman that she ran into was very angry. And she just talked about how she responded with love. And that ultimately the whole situation was diffused. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like those little things where there's so much anger in the ether right now. And what it means is that people are frightened. When I studied with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she really made it a point to emphasize that she would say all anger is an expression of grief. Now, that's very interesting, because we think of anger as having some biological component, and I remember a fellow in the class I was in with her said, well, we have a fight or flight response. That's biological. Elizabeth said, yes, but it only lasts 5 seconds. After that, everything is choice. And somebody else said, well, what does this mean? She said, anger is not a primary emotion. It means that something else is always underneath the anger. If you scratch the surface, it's either fear or sadness or a combination of both. So what I endeavor to do is to realize that anybody I encounter who's angry is really frightened, and they're really sad. And I try to listen to what it is they're frightened about and what they're sad about. And when I feel anger arise in myself, I ask the same question. What am I frightened about? What am I sad about? And those things bring us together. You know, it's very interesting that we have what we often refer to as political polarities or divisiveness in our culture. Mm-hmm. But I think that one of the things we need to do as we're dialoguing with one another is to get past who the bad guys are, you know, because that's what it generally, the non-dialogue is all about, the shouting is all about, you know, who's done the most terrible things, and ask ourselves what it is we're concerned about, that what do we fear that's going on and that might happen in the future, you know, and most of us can agree what we want is we want to leave our children and grandchildren a better country than we found. And we're afraid that isn't going to happen. And we're sad about the fact that people are being unkind to each other now, and that people are resorting to violence in the extreme cases. That makes us sad, which makes us frightened, which makes us angry. You know, and it's just kind of a vicious cycle that keeps going on. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a wonderful book, the title of which was just Anger, his Buddhist perspective on anger. And he was talking about, in all these different circumstances, how we need to focus on what it is that is causing this suffering, to relate to anger as suffering, and then really try to understand what the root cause of that suffering is in ourselves and in others.
This is giving me a new perspective. It's screaming at my printer. Okay. Wow.
Has your printer been annoying you?
Oh, inanimate objects generally do. Wow. That's definitely that's stuff to think about. So how does a normal person going about his or her life with all of its challenges ride herd on the impulses that most of us have had all of our lives? I mean, how do you get to the point where you can see it when it's happening and go, oh, I have a choice here?
Well, you know, I'm a meditation teacher, so I would recommend that.
You caught my lead in. I was feeding it to you.
Teed it up, as it were. Yeah. Well, the beauty of meditation is, and sometimes people are surprised by what they encounter in meditation, because basically, you know, the way that we're trained in this culture is to find solutions to our problems that are immediate and easy. And meditation is simple, but it's not easy, in the sense that what it's inviting us to really examine our own minds and how they work. It's inviting us to settle down. It will give you relaxation and serenity, hopefully, but it will also give you an opportunity to watch what your mind does when you're not feeling relaxed and serene. And that's, in essence, even the more important aspect of meditation practice, is to take a look at that. So you start with the notion that anger is suffering. And, you know, we can go through all kinds of psychological justifications for anger and, you know, psychology thinking that it's a good thing to express anger. It is not a good thing to suppress anger, but if we express it, one of the downsides is that not a lot of people are going to want to hang out with us. So, you know, and, you know, I look back at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. The first one is denial and isolation. Denial of what's happening. inability to recognize the truth of what's happening, and feeling isolated, like you're alone in the world. And then anger is the second one. And I've already shared what she said about that as being, always an expression of grief. But the problem is that if you express your grief in anger, you're going to wind up more isolated, generally. It's really true.
And with that, we're going to take our second break. We'll be back in just a minute, everybody. Stick around, please. How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. Today we're discussing living compassionately with Ramananda John E. Welshons. And just before the break, John was talking about the 5 stages of grief and anger being a manifestation of grief.
Yeah.
You'd also been talking
Would you want
about
me to pick
meditation.
it up there?
Yeah, but you'd also been talking about meditation and finding out how your mind works by getting quiet, and then you dovetailed into what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had been teaching you. So take it away.
Well, so I think that the first thing, the first step in being an average human being living an average daily life and getting free of anger and fear and sadness, not that we'd ever get free of sadness but it's to make a resolution in your own life that that's what you would like to do. Like, if you can see all of that as suffering rather than as it's understandable, but to say, I have a right to be angry, I need to express my anger, et cetera, is just going to increase suffering. So once you realize that, then you ask the question that you just asked, how do I get free of this? And I'm suggesting, among other things, dedicating yourself to a practice or a process that will help you do that. Meditation is one of the best I know. I've been doing it for over 50 years. And, it helps us to start to see. For instance, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said that the fight or flight response only lasts 5 seconds, the burst of adrenaline only lasts 5 seconds, all the rest is choice. What does that mean? That means that every time we get angry, there may be a flash of something like the kind of anger that a mother would feel if she felt her child was in danger. And she would be a flash of anger and adrenaline, like, what do I need to do to stop this and protect my child? But then to stay angry requires a choice. And so one of the things that meditation helps you to do is start to see your mind at every step along the way. You start to see that moment where you make the choice to be angry. And that's a choice to suffer. And again, I'm not suggesting that requires then complacency. It doesn't mean that you just allow anything to happen because you've decided not to be angry. It means that instead of acting from anger, you begin to learn to act from love. It's like a beautiful example is the situation with the environment. Do we have to act from anger that the earth is being so badly abused? Or, that hasn't worked in 50 years. Maybe what we need to do is begin to think of it in terms of loving the earth. How do we protect the earth? How do we learn to love it? How do we appreciate it? All it does for us. It's an incredible place to live if we just notice it and pay attention, take good care of it. So there are different practices that one can do every day. There are another thing that a friend of mine told me many years ago, one of my early teachers, said that I was going through a phase in my early 20s when I felt my life was meaningless. And he said, there's a simple prescription for that. I said, what is it? My goodness, tell me. He said, whenever you feel your life is meaningless, start doing more things for other people. And there's certainly no shortage of people on this planet who can use help of one kind or another, whatever it is. Just don't worry about it being a great magnanimous gesture. Just do whatever you can to be kind. Opening a door for someone and smiling at them, it can be a great gesture of kindness. It can change another person's life. Just being attentive, even at the level of what we used to call manners, which have sort of been, to a large extent, cast out of our society. But just when,
right.
You think about it, manners were really just about acknowledging that there were other people in the environment. Being kind, being respectful and thoughtful, not having to get there first all the time, not thinking about me all the time, but thinking about what can I do for others. That is another profound way to open the natural compassion that's in you.
It certainly gets you out of being so fixated on what's going on in your own life. If you can exert yourself and focus in a healthy way, even if it's just for a nanosecond, on another person.
Yeah, and it's another thing that I learned in Ukraine when I was there 30 years ago, was that these were people who had, by our American standards, they had nothing. Many of the people we visited with had created, decent homes and nice home environments, and their homes were cozy and warm, but, they had no wealth. They had no great possessions. Most of them didn't have automobiles, but they would give you, knowing that we were, what could be disparagingly called rich Americans, and not that we're rich here, but all Americans are rich to people in other countries, and it's, in a way, we are. But they would give us anything they had. They were the most generous, kind people I've ever encountered. So seeing what they're going through right now and seeing the buildings, many of which I recognize in Kyiv, being reduced to piles of rubble, it's just causing my heart to ache on a daily basis. It's really quite something. But I see in their example of people who know suffering, who know poverty, who know loss, to realize that they're doing this, what they're doing, and protecting and defending their country and their families, they're doing out of love, not out of hate. And that's a major difference.
It's a huge, long, ghastly lesson that we're all watching. What a teaching! What a teaching they're giving us. There may and be this may. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it may be apocryphal, but there is video footage of supposedly a Russian soldier who gave himself up pretty early on because he thought he was on an intelligence mission and didn't know he was supposed to kill people. And
right.
Ukrainians are handing him something to drink and letting him call his mother.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I heard another story. Again, I don't know if it's true. I heard it third hand, but it was a beautiful demonstration that the Ukrainian army was getting in contact with the Russian mothers of soldiers that they had captured and inviting them to come take their sons home. It's sort of like they've been acting out at school. You can come take your child home this afternoon. I mean, it's a whole different way that they're approaching this, and it's quite beautiful. And it's a contrast that we're seeing. You know, when you think about it, Kathy, we're seeing a man who is generally regarded as the richest man on earth, Vladimir Putin. And you see what has all that wealth done for him, you know? And we had a president here who aspired to be as wealthy as that. What did that do for him? And yet you see these people who have very little, who are so full of love, so full of kindness, so full of forgiveness. We're really seeing the dark side of humanity and the light side of humanity contrasted so profoundly in what's happening on Earth right now.
So what can people do in their own lives? You have recommended becoming aware of your own thought processes using meditation, engaging in acts for other people. Isn't there a benefit in meditation, or even like turning all your devices off for a couple of minutes and sitting quietly, of grounding yourself and resetting your being?
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's very interesting that we have developed this culture in which everybody's multitasking all the time, you know, and you have the television on and the computer's going and you're talking on the cell phone and there's music in the background. And all of this is really an effort to distract ourselves from our own minds. And if you really want to do the work of getting to true happiness and contentment and peace of mind and the ability to live in compassion, turn all the devices off and just sit in silence. I mean, it's amazing. And it's very hard we're raising generations of children who can't tolerate silence and inactivity. It just makes them crazy. That's because their minds are crazy. And we've cultivated that in the way that we raise them and train them. I don't know any path to happiness that doesn't require an ability to sit down, close your eyes, turn off all the external stimulus, and just be inside yourself. Just be quiet. Just listen instead of filling the space with chatter and noise. Yeah, that's a beautiful point you just made.
Well, all kinds of answers can come to you when you do that, actually. You can get much clearer on what your real thinking is on something, what your real feelings are, and open yourself up to guidance that's outside your logical mind.
Something we call intuition.
Well, it could be.
You know, or external guidance, whatever it is. You know, it's I once had a spiritual teacher who said that we really need to learn to listen to our own intuition. He said that's how God talks to us. And that voice is always present. It's just that we either don't know how to listen to it or we don't want to listen to it. But, you know, most of us are aware that sometimes when we get ourselves into some kind of a big mess in life, that very often there was some voice in us somewhere saying, don't do this.
Yes.
This is not going to work out well. And yet we say, you know, if it's a romantic thing, we say, oh, I know this is going to be terrible, but oh, his eyes are so beautiful, or her eyes are so beautiful, or I just, you know, whatever. And you just discount the voice of intuition, which if we learn to listen to it, would guide us with much greater wisdom than our desires and our fears and attachments.
Oh, yes. There is usually a moment of, and even if it doesn't hit the level of thought, there's usually a little tinge of something in your solar plexus or your stomach that doesn't quite feel right. And when you barrel through, oh boy, do you learn, oops.
Yeah. So one of the things that we learn in meditation is how to listen to our bodies, because sometimes the mind is so confused. It's much easier to go into what we're feeling in the body. So meditating on sensation in the body is a major aspect of the meditation tradition I teach and practice. And it's trusting the body's wisdom. One of my teachers, Stephen Levine, used to say, the body is solidified mind. So if something manifests in the body, might start as a little bit of quivering, a little discomfort, a little something. If we don't listen to it, it just keeps getting louder and louder. And very often, when we're dealing with some kind of syndrome in our bodies, it's because there's some part of our intuitive nature we're not listening to.
One of my clients sent me...
Go ahead.
The body. I was just going to say, one of my clients sent me a little plaque that says, "I told you so," signed your intuition.
Yeah, but I don't think the intuition is spiteful. It's very forgiving. It just says, well, you could have listened, Maybe you'll listen the next time.
We are, unfortunately... Yeah?
Go ahead. Were you going to tell me we're out of time?
We're wrapping up now. I was wondering if there's like one final lifeline of hope that you could leave people with.
There's always hope. The hope is that every human being on earth has great wisdom, great love, great compassion within them. And we can mine that. We can make it our practice in life to unveil that in ourselves. And if that starts to happen, sometimes it can inspire the people around us. You can't force them to open their hearts, but if you work on it in yourself, you can become an inspiration to others.
That is so very true, and you definitely are, and I thank you very, very much. Where can people find you?
Oh, here. www.johnwelshons.com or onesoulonelove.com. Both goes to the same place. Or they can email me, johnwelshons@earthlink.net.
Thank you so much. And everyone, be safe, and talk to you next time.
Thanks, Kathy.